we say that a square root of a is the number whose square is a. So 0 is a square root of 0 because 0 squared is equal to 0. 3 is a square root of 9 because 3 squared is equal to 9. Negative 3 is also a square root of 9 because negative 3 squared is equal to a positive 9 as well. So we can see that when we're talking about square roots, when we talk about the square roots of numbers, all positive numbers, we're going to have two real square roots, one that's positive and one that's negative. But when we use this symbol, the square root radical symbol here, it indicates the non-negative, which means positive or 0, or we call it the principal square root of a if a is positive. So the square root of 9, even though there's two of them, 3 and negative 3, we say that the square root of 9 using this symbol is always equal to 3. So the symbol always indicates the positive square root. And if we want the negative square root instead, we'll put the negative sign in front of the radical symbol with a in it. So when we see negative square root of 49, we want the square root of 49, which is 7, because 7 squared is 49, but we also want the negative root because it's got that negative sign. The square root of 25 over 36 is 5 over 6. Why? Because if I take 5/6 to the second power, it's equal to 25 over 36. The square root of 0.09 is going to be 0.3. If you multiply 0.3 times itself, so square it, it's going to be equal to 0.09. Square root of 0 is 0 because 0 squared is 0. The square root of x to the 6th, so we may not know that quite so easily. So what we're going to think is, what can we raise to the second power so that we get a 6 right there? And power to power we multiply, so that's going to be a 3. So x to the third raised to the second is x to the 6th. So the square root of x to the 6th is x to the third. So how about the square root of negative 9? Is there some number that we can square to get a negative answer? No, there's not. And we're going to say that this is not real. It's not that it doesn't exist, it can't be done, it's just not real. And we'll learn what it is exactly later on in this chapter. But for now, it's not real. And then the square root of 9x to the 12th. Well, we know that the 3 is going to be there for the 9. And then we've got to determine what that x is, so that when we square it, we get a 12. And that's going to be a 6, because x to the 6th squared, I'm going to multiply, and will give me 12. So 3x to the 6th squared gives me 9x to the 12th. Now that was all a bit of a review, but now let's talk about what a cube root is. A cube root of a is a number whose cube is a. And remember that a cube means to raise it to the third power. So 2 is a cube root of 8 because 2 to the third, which is 2 times 2 times 2, is equal to 8. Negative 3 is a cube root of negative 27 because if I take a negative 3 and raise it to the third power, a negative 3 times a negative 3 times a negative 3, we get negative 27. And 0 is a cube root of 0 because 0 to the third is equal to 0. Every real number has only one real cube root. Instead, with the square roots, there were two of them, a positive and negative possibility. But with negatives, the square root of negative 27 is going to be negative 3, and the square root of positive 8 can only be a positive 2. Because if I made it negative 2 and multiplied it times itself 3 times, I would get negative 8. So cube root of a denotes the cube root the symbol right there. And notice the difference between that and a square root. With a square root, there's nothing right here. And if there's nothing, that means a square root. But for a cube root, there's going to be a 3 in the index spot right there. So that's going to denote the cube root. So the cube root of a to the third is a, because a to the third is a to the third. All right, so let's try some of these. Cube root of 1,000. So you may have to do some guessing what that might be and then kind of check it out. But this is going to be equal to 10, because 10 to the third power is 1,000. 10 times 10 is 100, and 100 times 10 is 1,000. The cube root of -8 will be a negative number, and 2 is going to be our guess. -2 times -2 is +4, and +4 times another -2 gives me -8. Cube root of 125, you're going to guess it. It's going to have to be a smallish number, so that's going to be a 5. Times 5 is 25, times 5 again is 125. And the cube root of x to the third is x. The cube root of a -1/27 is going to be negative. And then the cube root of 1 is 1. And for 27, that's a 3. The cube root of 1 is 1, because 1 times 1 times 1 is still 1. The cube root of m to the 6, now what we want to think is what would we have, what power of m do we have so that we get a 6? So this exponent needs to be a 2, so 2 times 3 is 6. So m squared to the third power is equal to m to the 6th. And one last section in here, we can take it even further and say that the nth root of a is written this way. Nth root of a, and I have a little index here of n, which could be a 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, anything right there. So what we're going to do, we're going to ask ourselves what number I'm going to say multiplied right here. Multiplied together n times equals a. All right, so let's take a look at this. The fourth root of 81. So I want to know what number, what number I'm going to have raised to the fourth power is equal to 81. So what times what times what times what? Got to be the same number in there. So 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16. So that's not a 16. So try 3. 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. And 27 times 3 is 81. So if I multiply 3 out 4 times, I'm going to get it 81. So that's a 3. So this answer then is 3. Something you probably want to kind of memorize. Fifth root of -32. 32 is another one that take a fifth root of you should get memorized. A fifth root, this is going to have to be negative. Well, let's see if it would work. So if I multiply something 5 times, negative times negative is positive, positive times negative, yes, it's going to end up being negative. So my answer is going to be negative, and that answer is going to be 2. If I do 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16, and one more, 16 times 2 gives me -32. So -2 to the fifth power is 32. So this answer is -2. Fourth root of -1. Well, the only thing that's possible is 1, and we know positive 1's not it. So what about -1? What if I multiplied it? Well, this gives me a +1, and this gives me a +1, and that comes out positive. So there is no fourth root of -1, and again, we'll say something like it is not real. Right there.